Try to look at the camera if you can.
Okay.
I think I pretty much covered everything.
Yes.
I just want to test your audio one more time, so if you could just tell me like maybe what you ate for breakfast or something.
There was a little coffee stand around here that we went to, and we had an egg and cheese, or egg and potato burrito.
Ooh, that sounds
And I took
great.
a bite. I'm not really hungry.
Okay, nice. All right, perfect. Everything's good. I'm recording. Okay, so let's just start off by saying what your name is, where you're from, and how old you are.
Okay. My name is Tammy. My friends call me JoJo. I am originally from Columbus, Ohio, born in Akron, Ohio, but now I live in Austin, Texas.
Perfect. And what do you do for work? What's your life like?
Yeah, I'm 44 years old. I work
Wait, one thing. Sorry, can you actually do the first part with the age?
with the age.
as well?
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah. Okay. So my name is Tammy. My friends call me JoJo. I am originally from Columbus, Ohio. I'm born in Akron, Ohio, and I am 44 years old.
Perfect. And then, yeah, just tell me a bit about your life now. Where do you work?
Okay.
When did you move here?
So I moved here in December, and I work for Google here in Austin. Well, actually, I just work for Google. I work from home, but I moved here because of the Austin office. I work in tech. I am a part of the search team and the geo team. Yeah, I just work at Google, and I love it. It's fun.
Cool. We just have to wait for her to go up the stairs, but it's okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Would she be able to see me up there?
She probably can't see you, but she can hear you.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
The noise will be a problem. Okay. Yeah, and you can leave the door open so you can hear.
Yeah. We're good.
Okay. I just might ask that one more time. So what's your work like? Like, what do you do for Google?
So I work from home, but I am a part of the search team, which, the search engine. So like all the directors and engineers that make that happen, I support them.
And can you say, I think, because I didn't get it earlier, just like, I'm here now because I work at Google or something like that?
Yeah. So I moved from Columbus, Ohio, to work at Google. I'm originally in the New York office, but because we're working from home right now, I can pretty much work anywhere. But I moved here because when we do go back to work, there's an Austin office.
And do you like being here? Like, have you enjoyed yourself so far?
Oh, I love it. Coming from the cold and the snow, being in Texas is like a really big change. I used to live in Houston years ago for a while, but I love it. I love the weather. I love the people. Currently engaged, so it's really been nothing but a positive experience.
Yeah, and what's your home life like? Like, who do you live with? Do you have kids? Are you married?
So right now, I'm engaged, and I do have kids. I have a 22-year-old girl who's back in Ohio, and then I have my 17-year-old son and my 10-year-old son here with me. Home life right now is pretty standard. I have a roommate. We live in Pflugerville, which is near Austin, but we live in a big house, so we have like our own separate areas. But come summertime, I'll be moving in with my fiance.
Awesome. And how did you guys meet, if you don't mind me telling?
It's the same story as everybody else. Facebook dating. No, we met on a dating app, which is, can be good and bad. I think that if people are genuine with it, it can turn out really good. And I've heard really good stories about it too. You just have to be willing to talk in person and on the phone and on video, for authenticity,
Absolutely. And do you do anything that, like, outside of work? Like, what's your, how do you pass the time?
Yeah, so I am an author. I wrote From the Ground Up, Overcoming the Past and Rebuilding From the Ground Up, Overcoming the Past and Rebuilding Your Confidence. I wrote that in lieu of my story for people that wanted to know the story and how I got from there to here. And in the last 5 years or so, I've become a mega vitamin expert, which is a part of orthomolecular medicine, and that's basically treating chronic illnesses naturally with vitamins versus medicine. So I'm really passionate about that. I think that's what's kept me healthy because I don't have any chronic illnesses, whereas my family does. And so I've really been passionate about trying to stay in front of heart disease and sugar and diabetes. I just want to stay in front of it.
How did you get into that?
Well, I started researching because I was originally doing health coach stuff. And so I was into juicing and doing the smoothies, and I watched a lot of the documentaries, and then the passion started. And right now, there really isn't like a degree program for it. So I got certified through a couple of different health coaching places, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to dig deeper. And so I got into the science behind it, and that's when I found orthomolecular medicine as a whole. And I really love it. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And so, you said you grew up in Ohio. What was growing up in Columbus like, or Akron? I don't remember exactly.
I was born in Akron. So I was born in Akron until I was 12 years old. And then there was a gap of time when I went from Akron to the Juvenile institution from 12 to 21. And then when I got out, I landed in Columbus, probably because it was the closest area, because that facility is in Delaware, Ohio. And so my transition there just kind of made sense.
And what was your childhood like, if you don't mind going into some of those details?
Okay, let's see. Okay.
And I can ask a more specific question if that's easier for you, but.
No, I kind of forgot what I was, okay. So growing up in Akron, Ohio, it was just me and my mom. My dad died when I was 3, and she pretty much raised me as a single mom. I have 2 older brothers, but they were always in and out of prison, so I never really got to spend time with them. There were periods of time that I remember spending small amounts of time with them, but not a lot. A lot of what I remember is good, but there were other issues in the house. She took care of my niece and my nephew a lot. I remember packing bags and boxes for my brothers, and we would go see them occasionally, which brought a lot of stress on her, I believe. Her being a single mom, we lived in a house, we were middle class, and so she paid attention to me. She even made my clothes. Like if I wanted like a trendy outfit, she sewed, so she would make it for me. I would say that my mom and I were pretty close. There were, of course, mother-daughter, disagreements, but we were really close. What she didn't know is that I was being sexually molested by my cousins, and that I was being bullied at school. She did not know those things until way later. But she always asked questions. She was always concerned, but I think I just wanted to protect her from that stuff because I saw that she was already going through a lot of stuff, and so I didn't want to add to that. And even at 12 years old, I kind of knew what stress was, by watching her handle things, and so I didn't want to give her that. So a lot of what was going on behind closed doors, she didn't know. The bullying at school, it came out because I was getting in trouble a lot. I tried to hide behind it with like cheerleading and sports and Girl Scouts and that kind of stuff, but I kept getting into fights, but I didn't start the fights and I didn't really know how to protect myself. So it really turned into a bullying situation. And when she found out about it, she was heated. And her being a mom, which I understand now because I'm a mom, her attempt was to teach me how to defend myself. And so this one time, there was this boy that wanted to fight me. And, back in that day, we planned fights. Like, we're going to fight after school, And so I knew that was coming, and I was scared. And so she made me sharpen 2 number 2 pencils, and she told me to keep them in my pocket all day. And she told me that if someone messes with me, that I needed to stab them. And her being a mom and trying to protect me, I thought that was pretty much okay. So when the school end came and the boy was standing in front of me, before he wouldn't let me move, he wouldn't let me get out the way. And so before he even put his hands on me, I stabbed him with the pencils, but then I ran. I took off because I didn't know how to fight. But he caught me, and he got me to the ground, and he beat me up pretty badly. It was by the time I was running, I got to my street, and so my mom came out, and she was running towards me, and everybody, flew, they kind of took off, in different directions. But I remember that because him and I became friends later in life. and we talked about it a little bit. But yeah, I remember that was crazy. And I think that the violent thing, you know, I had never done that before, but it made me feel powerful. It made me feel good. But I think internally it may have caused some problems.
And you said that you were on the phone that you, at the time, because of the bullying, and you were struggling with your mental health, right? Like you would have nightmares and things like that. And
Yeah.
can you explain a bit about what you were going through in that regard?
Yeah, so I can explain it now as an adult because I had to do some research for the book. But as a 12-year-old, I didn't know what was happening. I just learned about it later. But physically and mentally, what was the result or the symptoms were nightmare disorder. I was diagnosed with nightmare or terror disorder, night terror disorder, and disassociation disorder and PTSD. There was a period of time where I got sexually assaulted at school, and even though, you know, the principal was involved and they had the police there and they did like a rape kit and all this other kind of stuff, it happened. And so my mom pulled me out of that school. And when she pulled me out of that school, I felt like it was my fault, you know. All these different things that was happening to me, it seemed like I was the common denominator, you know. I was being sexually molested by my cousins. I was being bullied at school. You know, this guy, and he was a bigger 8th grader, but he attempted to rape me. So, like, I felt like I was the cause. And so what do you do with a problem? You remove it. And so my mom took me out of that school and she put me in a Christian school. But the Christian school was worse because I was learning about spiritual things in an unhealthy way. And the kids there called me demonic, and they said that, you know, I was evil, and, you know, and it wasn't because of my history. It was because I was black. It was because I was dark skinned. It was because I wore glasses. It was because I was different than them. And so they called me these spiritual names that I was unfamiliar with, but I kind of took on the identity of being that evil, and I thought that something really was wrong with me. So the way that it was explained to me, my mom would pad the walls because as a result of the night terrors, I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would run through the house and leave out the front door. And she wanted to pad the walls, or she padded a couple of the tables because she didn't want me to hurt myself during those episodes. But what I remember is I always just woke up crying in her arms, but I never really fully understood why. I didn't know why I was there, why I was crying. I knew that I had nightmares, but I didn't know that they were nightmares because at the time they were really real. And what it consisted of is, number one, something evil was always chasing me, and it was like a narration. Like there was this like dark thing that was narrating my dream, and in those dreams, that dark thing would have me harm the people that were harming me. So in my dreams, I was doing all of this torturing, but I didn't want to. But if I didn't, the thing would chase me, it would get me. I never really knew what it would do, but it was the fear that made me do the things in the dream. And I mean, like, there were times that I would stab my cousins to death in these dreams. There were times that I would like put knives in their sexual areas and I would gut them, you know, like really horrible dreams. And I didn't really understand it then, but I knew I didn't like it, and I knew it made me afraid. What ended up happening later is that some of my people that I cared about crossed over into those night terrors. So like now I was hurting people that I loved, like my nephew and my niece, and that really bothered me. And so I began to run from this thing so that I wouldn't have to hurt anybody. And I guess what would happen is I would be running and crying and waking up doing it and not really coming to until, you know, I was conscious. So that was like, it was strange because at the time, I didn't know what was going on, but I just knew that I was really afraid. And so I think my mom was trying to get me help. She was trying to have me talk to people, but I couldn't articulate that. All I could say was something was chasing me, and it didn't really do it justice because not only was it chasing me, but it was making me do horrible things, and I didn't want to get in trouble. And so I didn't say much. So the counseling and all the therapy, aside from the diagnoses, it didn't help. At least I don't think it helped.
And so you did end up seeing doctors and counselors and things at that age?
Yeah, my mom took me a few times. I think that's where, from what I read, that's where the diagnoses came from. She stopped because I didn't talk. And I think that for her, just based on knowing her, I think she felt like it was probably a waste of time. And, you know, it wasn't, I understand it wasn't now, but I mean, as a child, it was like I didn't want to go. I didn't want to be forced to talk about things during the day that happened at night. It was horrible.
And did you know, when was it at its kind of worst moment for you?
I would say just based on what it was, based on the fact that I was so scared. As I said, like, I was hurting people now in my dream that I didn't want to hurt. And so the only way that I could get away in my dream was to jump off of something, or I had to kill myself in my dream. Now, I didn't understand what suicide was at the time because that's not what I called it when I was 12. It was more like a reincarnation. My aunt had introduced me to spiritual things, and I had learned about spiritual things from the Christian school that I went to. And I came to the conclusion at that age that if I could just take myself out and start over, then I wouldn't have to worry about some of the things that were happening to me. So taking my life the idea behind it was to come back and start over as something else. And so I would say it was at its worst when there was a gun in the house. And I didn't know who it belonged to, but I remember seeing it, and then I didn't mess with it. But then when I made the decision that I was going to take my life, I believe I saw something on TV where guns killed people. And that's all I knew. Like, it wasn't a suicide. I don't even remember what movie it was, but I felt like, okay, I'm going to go get this gun, and I'm going to shoot myself with it. And I mean, it was just a simple thought, a simple decision. My mind had been made up. And so when I went to go find the gun, where I last saw it, I couldn't, it wasn't there. And so my guess is, as an adult, I think that my mom probably saw that I messed with it, and so she moved it. That's my guess. But what happened in that moment is it made me determined to find it, because now I had a plan and I wanted to die and I couldn't find the gun. So it was like one night I just started looking for the gun. I mean, I looked everywhere that I could for the gun. I remember calling a friend of mine, and I remember telling him that I wanted to die, that I wanted to take my life. I don't know if I said it like that. I don't remember my verbiage at that age, but I just remember talking on the phone to someone. And I remember that person saying, you don't want to do that. But then that's it. That's all I remember in that conversation. So I did find the gun. It was in our spare room where my nephew and my cousin stayed. And it was inside of a hat. It was in a hat, and it was in a case. I didn't know what type of gun it was at that time because I had never seen one in real life, but it was a revolver. So there was a barrel, and I think that's a revolver, and it had bullets in it. I don't remember how many, but I think it was full maybe at the time. But I found it, and when I found it, I remember feeling so relieved, like, okay. And so I took the gun to bed with me that night, and I put it under my pillow. And the goal was, if something were to try to mess with me, then I would shoot it, and then I would take my life so that I could start over. This was the idea, that I would do it. Of course, I didn't realize that I was dreaming. To me, they were just night episodes, like, because to me, it wasn't a dream. So, but I knew that if I can shoot it and then I can shoot me, then the idea was that I could start over in this brand new place as this brand new person or thing. So that was the plan. Now, as I got a little bit older and I play that night back, and I read the different stories the different reports that were told, I recognized that I was in one of those episodes when I shot my mom. And what I didn't know at the time was how. But with counseling, so these are things that I had to discover later, but I'm going to tell them to you as if it's a straight through process, but it wasn't. So that night, I guess I fell asleep, and the evil thing that was forcing me to do these things showed up, and it started chasing me. Now, consciously, I don't remember having the gun under my pillow. Because when I was in this episode, I forgot about the gun. I forgot about it being under my pillow because the only thing I wanted to do was to get away. But apparently, I shot the gun in the house several times, and my mom was asleep on the couch, and I also ran out of the front door. So from the different reports that I read, me running out of the door was correct because someone said that I was running up and down the street screaming. So that led me to believe that that was during one of those times where my mom would normally, catch me and not let me go out, but I got out. But I didn't know what happened to her. So fast forward to that, so I remember being in the hospital. I was at Children's Hospital in the psychological ward, which I found out. And I remember being in the hospital because I remember them asking me about night terrors. And I remember them asking me about some of the things that, that I was going through. What I didn't know is that they were treating me as like someone that lost a parent. But I didn't know that then. So they were talking to me, trying to get me to open up. And at that time, I didn't really know what had happened. I just knew that I was in the hospital. And so when they released me out of the hospital, and this is after everything had happened. And I remember going with my family, and everybody was around. It was like a normal, gathering. People were eating and talking, but they weren't saying anything to me. I was playing with my cousins like I always do. I even went to the beach. So the only thing I do remember is wondering where my mom was. I didn't ask because I believe that subconsciously I felt like something happened, but it was like this secret that nobody was telling me. And so I never asked because my mom always kept me to herself. She didn't really allow me to go around a lot of family members. And I think it was because at some point I told her that my cousins were touching me. I didn't go into details, but so she kind of kept me isolated. But so during this time, nobody was really saying anything to me. And my uncle showed up and we took a walk. And I remember him asking me what happened that night. And I at the time, I didn't know why he asked me. And I didn't even know why he had this awareness. But what I knew is that he was the very first and only person that actually asked me. And I told him what I thought and what I knew, I told him that something was chasing me, and I remember being outside, and I even revealed to him, I said, I think I shot it, the thing or whatever. But I don't remember if he gave me an explanation or not, but I do remember him taking me to the police department. And I remember him telling me to tell them what I told him. And it couldn't have made sense because it didn't make sense to me, but out of my mouth came the words that I shot a gun. What I do know from research is that after it happened, they actually did take me to the police to do a fingerprint, but they didn't have anything. And I think that was why they released me to go to the hospital. I'm not sure. I don't remember the order, but I just remember, after I said it out loud, that's when I was taken into custody. I was in the detention center in Akron for about 6 months. They were processing information. I had a court-appointed attorney. I didn't have a trial or anything like that, and nobody really talked to me. They assigned doctors and stuff to me, and they, talked to me about stuff, but the girls that were there, they had wind of what happened. So they were telling me that I shot my mom and that you know, this is what I did. They were telling me this because I guess this is what came out in the paper, or this is what they heard on the news or something. And so I'm like, well, I don't remember doing that, but I took ownership of it, I guess. And I tried to articulate that it wasn't me, it was the thing that made me, you know, like I was trying to articulate this phenomenon, this night terror, but I couldn't. But they did all these different psychiatric evaluations, and when I went to what was called a sentencing hearing, because I didn't have a trial, I had a hearing when I came in, and then I had a hearing when I got sent off. And so I went to what was called a sentencing hearing, and I do remember there was a prosecutor, and I don't, to be honest, I don't know if I remember this or if I just remember reading it, but the prosecutor, my court-appointed attorney wanted me to go to a mental institution to get some help. And the prosecuting attorney wanted me to go to SIOTA, or the Juvenile Correctional Facility, until I was 21. I remember the battle back and forth. And what I learned later from the judge that sentenced me, years later when I went back when I was 20, she explained to me that the reason she sentenced me to 21 was to protect me. And I didn't really, even to that day, I didn't really understand that until later as I became an adult and a mom and all that kind of stuff. But so there were gaps, and there were things that I remember, and then there were things that I filled in as I read reports and heard from other people in my family. When I was in the detention center, the only people that came to see me was my grandma and my uncle. We didn't really talk about what happened, like, at all. And I kind of believe that that's just how my family was. We didn't really talk about stuff. That's how come there were secrets, you know? But they came to see me, you know? And all I knew is that, and my aunt too, after she was in prison for a while. So after she got out of prison, she, you know, made sure she came and saw me and kept in touch. But that's all I remember. And then once so I went from the detention center, which was like the local area, and then I remember one thing that happened at the detention center. So there was a staff member that molested me. And at this point, it had happened so much that I kind of felt like it was like a normal thing. Like, that's what my body was for, you know, like, why not, you know? But after a while, he was rough, you know, and I didn't want him touching me. And so I tried to tell one of the other staff members that thought I was close to, but it was a friend of hers. And so when I told her, she was like, no, he's not. And I was like, yes, he is. And I think that was my first time telling someone, you know, outside of my mom, that someone touched me, and they didn't believe me. So it was like, well, whatever, you know. But what I noticed about her was that he was no longer allowed in my room, which, as an adult, I don't know why he was allowed in there anyway, but he was no longer allowed in my room because he would come in my room and talk to me, and that's when it would happen. So I remember that. And then when I got sent off to SIOTA, I was 12 or 13. And when I got there, though, it was like a Girl Scout camp almost. It didn't yet look like a facility. There were little cottages around it. It was wooded area almost. There was no fence, there was no gate, there was nothing. It was just like this. Everybody was walking around in like polos and slacks. And so I felt safe for the first time in a long time. Once I was taken away, you know, from my family and everybody, didn't really understand why I was there, but I felt safe. And that was my introduction into the institution.
Before we get into what your life was like at the institution, do you remember what you were feeling or what your emotions were when you finally did realize that your mother had died or she had passed away, and that like it maybe was a result of your terrors? Yeah.
Yeah, but so if I understood or had a realization of that before I went into the institution, I don't remember it. My first recall of that was actually when I was at the institution, because what happened was I was assigned a caseworker and, you know, unit manager, and the superintendent at the time, she kind of took me under her wing, and so she talked to me a lot. She's the one that introduced me to my clinical psychologist a couple years later. And it was then that the work really started. She's someone that I met her when I was 14, and she kind of cultivated, like the whole time I was there, kind of protected. I feel like she kind of protected me in that even though I had this record of these different diagnoses, she didn't let them put me on, you know, medication of any type. You know, the PTSD stuff that it seemed like everybody else was getting, the Ritalin, the Prozac, all that stuff, I didn't get any of that stuff. So what I understand now is that she kind of wanted me to organically go through so that I could remember without being, you know, tainted by drugs. And that's another reason why, you know, I believe in like holistic stuff today. So she ran something called a homicide group. And basically in the institution, there were only like maybe 5 or 6 of us that was there for like an actual homicide or felonious assault or like a manslaughter or whatever. But we had groups. And so in these groups, because we were separate from everybody else, so in these groups, we learned about victimization, and we learned about, you know, what we were there for, and that we took a life. And I believe that it was at that time that I actually learned what happened, because she was the first person that told me what I did. She was the first person that, at least from what I recall, you know, she was the first person that really explained it to me. And I think that that's when guilt happened. That's when I became kind of withdrawal. I had nightmares. I was replaying this back in my mind, like there's no way, or, you know, like, did I do that? And I think I just had to go through stuff just to deal with the fact that I was responsible for her death. And I think it made me angry, because that wasn't the goal. The goal was for me to take my life so that I can start over. And I think that even when I went into the institution and I learned about what I did, I had a plan. I was still going to do it. And but, you know, as I talked about it and I began to feel safe enough to reveal some of the things that I was feeling and some of the things that I believed happened versus, you know, because she had the actual paperwork of a lot of stuff. So she was able to help me walk through what I was saying and matching it up to what she got, you know? And so together, along with the people in this group, we kind of figured it out. We kind of talked it through. And even as I got older, I became better at articulating it. And, you know, the big thing was to accept responsibility for it. We talked about being a victim and how, you know, even though I was a victim as a child, I created a victim and I had to take responsibility for that. And it was hard because it was my mom. And there were times that I went through just stuff because nobody else did that, you know, like the different victims that everybody else had was like somebody that hurt them or somebody that did them wrong or harm. And it's like, here's somebody that did the opposite, you know, she took care of me, she loved me. And like, so I felt guilt about that. I didn't really feel like I had lost something personally as my mom until I got older. But, you know, it took a while. I believe that there was just a lot of love and hard work that was poured into me to help me figure it out.
And today, you know, what is it like in your family? Do people do they have hard feelings towards you? Do they blame you? Do you blame yourself? Like, what is that situation like right now?
So present day, I mean, I take responsibility for it no matter what, because it happened, you know. a lot of my family, they don't know the whole story, which was why I wrote the book. People in my family at that time, they didn't really talk about issues, you know. My grandma, I talked to my grandma about what happened eventually, or I tried to actually, but she told me she said, I don't need to hear that. I love you and I'm here, you know. She passed away a few years ago. My aunt is probably the only person that I really had an opportunity to really discuss what happened, because she was able to fill in some other gaps. Like, you know, she was the one that told me that after she took me to church, and because I was trying to understand things, she said after she took me to church and exposed me to like spiritual stuff, she said that I would always ask, if I die, will I go to heaven or hell? And she told me that I would get really upset when she couldn't give me an answer. And I put that around the same time that I was going to that Christian school, because I was being called evil and demonic and stuff like that. So I was able to place those two things together. And she explained to me the different characteristics of my mom. Like, she was the one that explained to me that my mom wanted to help me. She's the one that took me to the doctor, because my mom and her were close. And so they had these discussions, I guess. So other than that, there are a few people in my family that really didn't want anything to do with me at all. But I didn't know that until after I was released from the institution and I went around them. But they didn't say, there were some of them that would leave the room, but then there were some of them that just, you know, it was just like I was back home. You know, nobody asked questions, nobody, you know, I don't know. There's a few people that I know want to talk to me. I know they do. Like, for example, my niece reached out to me on Facebook several years ago, I believe. And when it happened, my niece was really little. I think she was 5 or 6. And I loved her, you know. And the thing about my niece and my nephew is I protected them from the other people in my family that was sexually molesting me. I didn't want that to happen to them. And they don't know that, you know, but when my niece contacted me on Facebook, she had only been exposed to what she was told. And so when she first started talking to me, she was like, how could you do that? How could you, you know, she was kind of in this state of blame. But at that time, I was at a point where I could understand and kind of relate with her. But I said, hey, look, like, you don't understand what happened, you know, like, you don't know the story. Let me tell you my side, you know. And so she got the book, she read it, and then she called me back and she was like, I'm so sorry. She said, I didn't know, you know. So little things like that happen occasionally. But other than that, I've just kind of been a lone wolf. I've been on my own ever since I left the institution, which was, you know, difficult in and of itself. But yeah, so the only family members that I really keep in touch with, my brothers came around eventually. The one thing I do remember is having this conversation. She was my psychotherapist, but she ended up becoming superintendent of one of the institutions. And so after I graduated from high school, she let me go to college off campus. And one of the things that she called me in the office one day about was my brother was being released from prison. And he expressed ill will towards me. I don't even remember which brother it was that we discussed, but I remember her being afraid for me. But that's all I remember from that. So fast forward today, I've verbally talked to both of my brothers, and, you know, they seem okay. They say they love me and that they're here for me. I don't know if they know the whole story or not, but I wouldn't mind telling them. It's just that I don't think everybody is in a place to be able to receive that information. I don't think that when it comes to trauma, everybody don't want to deal with it. I was forced to, I was trained to, so, but everybody don't want to look at the past. They don't want to deal with it at all. But I'm here, you know, if and when they want to, I'm here. It's just that at the same time, I won't allow anybody to abuse me, you know? Like I've built like this self-protection over myself, but I can still relate with them. I can still understand how they might feel. I can still say, you know, I know that this hurt you and I'm sorry and I wish I could take it back, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that I deserve more abuse because I lost something too, you know.
And you talk a lot about leaving the the facility when you were 20 or 21. And what was that transition like for you?
It was hard. So when I went in, you know, I wasn't even a freshman in high school. When I went in, I think it was like the summer of after 8th grade ended. The gap of time, me being there, everything was pretty systematic. I did the same things every day. It was a very controlled environment. Remember how I said, you know, when I first got there, it was like a Girl Scout camp. And I think it was because I had gone to Girl Scout camp before. And that's what I related it to. And I felt safe. And there was nothing but girls. But as crime on the outside with juveniles became more prevalent, as they were deciding as a state if they wanted to try juveniles as adults, this facility began to be built. And so like the cottages went away and the barbed wire gates went up and the bigger buildings went up. And so I was there through that whole process. There would be news stations and Congress panels that would come in and they would talk to some of us who were there for very serious crimes. I think they blurred my face out, but I remember doing quite a few of those type of interviews. But they asked, like, how do you feel about, you know, this happening or whatever? But what they didn't understand is that we didn't know what was going on out there, because when the girls that were outside doing the crimes, when they came on the inside, because they were protected, because no one could hurt them, they didn't realize that that was just a blessing in and of itself. I understand it because these are the same girls that I had groups with every day. You know, we had to talk about what they would call it now is emotional intelligence. But back then, all we knew was that we had to deal with shit. You know, like we had to talk about what we did. We had to talk about the victims that we created. Now, for me, I had a homicide group where I did most of that. But then I also had just a general population group where, you know, I sat in rooms with girls that ran away or girls that got put in for assault or drugs or, you know, so as I grew and matured in my homicide group, you know, I became a person that was able to help draw some of that stuff out in my general population groups. And what I learned is that all the girls that were there were victims of something. And like, there were girls that were there because their mom's boyfriends were molesting them and their mom didn't believe them, so they, you know, stabbed them or ran away or something like that. And then so I'm in these groups every single day, sometimes twice a day. And, you know, I have a social worker, I have a psychotherapist, and we're doing this stuff, this mental health stuff every day. But then I go sit on a panel where they're talking about, you know, should we try juveniles as adults? Like, it was like two totally different worlds. It was like the world outside didn't really understand what was happening to the girls that were coming in. They just saw them as people that were hurting people, you know? And I learned about advocacy, you know, like I didn't have anybody to advocate for me. And some of these girls didn't either. And what would make me really sad is that we would come in and they would come into the institution, they would do all this work. They would do all this emotional work. They would do all this mental work. And then because of a social worker or a technicality or something like that, they would end up going right back into the same environment that they left. And then they would come back. So like, I've sat in groups with girls that came 4 or 5 times. And it's sad because like, even in the institution itself, like it really wasn't safe. When I was 15, there was a staff member that sexually molested me. The only difference is that I had done some work. And so I knew that that wasn't okay. And so I ended up telling the person, my psychotherapist, I ended up telling her about it, and she was a superintendent. And so I remember her wiring me up because it happened at night. on third shift. And I remember her putting a wire on me, and he got caught in the act. And so he got taken away. I ended up having to go to court for him, but I found out that I wasn't the only one that he did that to later. So it's just crazy how in this institution, it's like this place where we can do all this mental work and deal with things. Things still get inside, you know, people still hurt, but at the end of the day, when they leave the institution, now they do have tools. They do have, you know, places and mentally that they could go and process, and at least that's what I would think, you know. I didn't keep in touch with anybody. Like, that was that became part of my personality inside the institution. I had to learn to let people go. Thousands of girls I've interacted with between the age of 13 to 18 years old, thousands of them over the course of the 8 years that I was there. And I made friends, you know, and some of them that were there 6 months, 3 months, a year, 2 years, you know, I thought they were my friends, but I was in a controlled environment. I didn't know. And so they would leave and they wouldn't keep in touch. I didn't get letters. I didn't get cards. I didn't get any of that stuff. So I had to learn to let people go fairly easily. And I did that the whole time I was there. And I got to a point where I would give myself, like I would be in like a general population group, and I would feel comfortable talking about why I was there, what I had done, and how, even though it's hard, I have to take responsibility for it. And it would help some of the other girls open up and talk. So in a sense, I became like this advocate for them, you know. And then close to the time when I was 21, I graduated from high school, because within the institution, it was a regular school, but it was just inside the institution. So we still had classes, but they were just general classes in order to pass the proficiency testing. And, you know, we had art and stuff like that. But I mean, I'm saying it was like regular school, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know what regular school's like. I just know what this was like. But watching my kids go through it, it was similar. It was just in a controlled environment. And after I graduated, I remember having the conversation about what was next. And the first thing that they had me do was take like a correspondence course with some general education stuff. And so they sent me the books by mail. I would do the work and send it back. But my advocate, I'm gonna call her my advocate because she's been with me through this entire journey, and I still talk to her today. But she's my psychotherapist that turned into the superintendent. I talk about her all the time. But what she did was she made it possible. Her thing was, okay, we're about to release her at 21. She's never had any contact outside of the institution. We need to prepare her as best we can. And I remember hearing social workers say, like, she's not gonna make it. She's gonna be institutionalized. She's not gonna be able to function. She's gonna hurt herself, or she's gonna hurt somebody else. Or, you know, she's gonna commit all these crimes because she doesn't know better. Like, there were all these rumors, but my focus was on what she was telling me, because this is the person that I built trust with. And I believed her. And, you know, she told me that she wanted me to go to college and come back. So they moved me from inside of the gate to the drug and alcohol facility outside of the gate, but still on campus, but it wasn't as restricted. So I was able to go to Columbus State and take classes, and I did. It was strange at first. I was hidden, you know. I didn't want people to know anything about me. I just wanted to go do my work and then come back to the institution. When I came back to the institution, the only dynamics that had changed was, you know, I had my own room, I had a computer, and that's when I started messing around with computers. And the only difference was that now I was older than all of the girls that were there. And so I became like, in as far as peer, the staff members were closer to my age at that time. So, you know, they were the ones taking me, dropping me off, and picking me up. So that was the only experience that I had with the outside while I was in, which was going to college and then coming back.
And what was the biggest challenge for you once you were out?
once I left, I didn't want people to know what I had done. By this time, you know, I think that one of the biggest challenges was that my mom wasn't there. You know, like, here I am in this whole big brand new world, and I have no idea what to do, you know. The last few months, they helped me get an apartment. I had worked my last couple years, so I had money saved. And I knew how to work because they let me work inside at the administrative offices doing different stuff. So I gained some skills. I had leadership skills because after a while I became like president of AA and NA, and I would speak, but this was inside of the institution because I became somewhat of a role model because I had been there so long that the girls that came in, you know, I kind of helped peer coach them or, you know, help them through stuff. So I had some tangible skills that assisted me with life when I got out. But the basic stuff I had a hard time with. Like, when I remember being in my apartment my very first night, and I locked my bedroom door, I locked the front door, and I was scared to death, like, because it was just like it was a one bedroom, but it was just me, you know? And I mean, I had been so used to being around people, like, I mean, I've always had 20 or 30 people around, you know? So I think that it was just scary because I felt alone. And I felt scared about, you know, what if somebody finds out who I am? What do they do, you know? So I had to learn how to pay bills. I didn't know how to do that until the lights got cut off. But someone had to show me, and because people had to show me some of these basic things, I felt like they would ask questions. Like, these are things that I should already know how to do. But I kept it pretty hidden for a long time. And one of the things that I recognize now is that I was introduced to the welfare system. So being in the institution, when I got out, they wanted me to have all the resources available to me because I qualified for all this stuff because I had been in so long. And I didn't think anything was wrong with that. I mean, it was just another step for me. Okay, I need to get food stamps. I need to get Medicaid. I need to make sure I go do this paperwork, you know. And so it was just routine. Got food stamps, you know, got paperwork, and I worked. And so that was just my routine. But I was very isolated, very alone. Didn't really know how to make friends. Didn't really know how to communicate with people on the outside. That took a while. I didn't know how to drive either. There were just a lot of things that I just didn't know. Socially, emotionally, just relationships, all that stuff I had a hard time with when I got out because people didn't know. So here I am with this big secret. You know, I've been in an institution since the time I was 12. You know, people are already saying I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to function. So I'm scared because some of that stuff was spoken into me. But then I had the other part that was spoken into me from different church organizations that came into the institution that said, hey, and that's where my spiritual life grew too. Like, hey, no, you are forgiven, you are loved, you are chosen, you are, you know. So I had these opposing sides, and I realized that I had to choose which identity I was going to take. And, you know, eventually, of course, you know, me being here now, I chose the better one, but the struggle inside was still really hard.
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you feel like, you know, do you feel like you've made it, I guess, is my question? Like, do you feel like you've grown to the point that you wanted to?
What I would say about that is when I go back and I calculate the things that were done to me by people that were supposed to love me, things that happened to me that shouldn't have, the fact that I'm able to forgive those people, and I have, and if it wasn't for Yah, which is God's name, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have made it. There's no way. There's no other explanation because I was hurt, you know. I mean, sometimes I'm in day-to-day life, so I don't have the opportunity to really think about it like I'm sitting here with it now. Like, people hurt me sexually, you know. They hurt me physically, you know. They hurt me emotionally. It's like, if there's not, I can't even form the words if there's not a God, you know, because I know that the times that I've prayed, the times that I've cried, the times even just throughout the institution, you know, I was asking for healing. I was asking for an understanding. And there were so many things that I got to do. My night terror disorder, it went away because I was introduced to lucid dreaming. And that was a technique that allowed me and taught me how to control my dreams. If it wasn't for things like that, and when I cry out and when I was hurt because people left me and didn't keep in touch, you know, so I felt alone, like, but God was always there. Even when I was getting out and I knew that I was about to face this really big world of which I knew nothing, like, I believe that God was there because as soon as I left, a couple of years before I left, I was introduced to a local church where I had a pastor, and that pastor connected me with like 2 women in the church that they were there for me through everything, through the birth of my daughter. When I got out, I could ask them questions. They taught me how to be a mom. Like, I had a small number of people that loved me enough to help me walk into my destiny. And if it wasn't for God and if it wasn't for Him placing those people in my life, I don't really know. I mean, it could have been bad. I could have got out and decided, okay, now I really get to take my life. Or, you know, like there were so many other things that could have happened that didn't. So I wouldn't say that I've made it because I'm still an adult. I still make mistakes. I'm still human, you know. There's some residuals, you know, like sometimes I have a hard time forming relationships and, you know, because of the trust thing. Sometimes because I have kids, I can be a little overprotective because of what happened to me as a kid. You know, there's some residual stuff that you know, catches me up sometimes, but I have so many tools available to me in the emotional intelligence realm that I just use them, you know, to my advantage. That's how come, you know, I work at Google. That's how come I've been a flight attendant. That's how come I got to be a talk show host, because I learned how to go above what people say or think about who I am and what I can become.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too if you can talk a bit about some of the like positive relationships you have in your life right now too, as
Yeah.
like, you know, because that shows your growth in many ways. Or
Yeah, so I had to learn people. Learning people is a hard task for anybody, but for me, the first thing that I had to do was expose me, right? Because when you're building relationships and you're building trust, if I always felt like I was keeping the secret, you know, like, you know, people in general, where'd you graduate from school? You know, what was your life like? But, you know, so I hid a lot of that stuff. And so with me having the relationship with God that I did and me being involved in the church like I was, I learned that that could be used for good. And people that were in that environment with me began to say, you need to tell your story. And, you know, and then the research began. You know, I had to dig. I had to build relationships with the people that were to release the records to me because, you know, I had to prove that I was who I said I was. I had to dig and find information. So I had to build professional relationships. And then throughout some of this time, I ended up meeting my best friend. We flew together as flight attendants. And she became like this, I would say she would be the equivalent of a best friend you would have in high school, except I just got her a little later. And so there was her. And then even though I'm divorced, you know, my ex-husband and I built a friendship. And he's, you know, remarried now. They have kids. We're all still close though, because of me being able to do that. And then my fiance now is a blessing. So learning people and how they operate first comes with being able to accept my past and being able to say, this is what I did, but this is not who I am. This is what happened to me, and this is how I changed it around for something good. I do have like an innate ability to care about people probably more than I should, but that's only because I want what's best for them. And it's only because I have the heart of God too. So like, I don't make victims anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like even verbal abuse, even, any of the stuff right now that the world is doing, I don't do that. I don't hurt people's feelings. I don't downplay or talk about women. Even if I have like a bad boyfriend type relationship, I don't talk down to them. I don't hurt other people intentionally because I can't. It's just something that's wired in me now. So I went from being withdrawn and isolated to now being like this advocate and this person that cares. And so anytime there's an opportunity, sort of like this one, but even one-on-one, if there's an opportunity where a woman will come to me and say that these things happen to her, and I'm able to say, me too, but let me tell you, like, you can get through this. And there's always a time when the smoke clears. There's always a different season that you can walk into, but it's going to start with who you are, accepting what you've done, and not choosing to be the victim or not choosing to be what other people call you, but what is it that you want to be? And so, yeah, I mean, even my relationships at work, I work with very smart people, like, oh my gosh. And we call it imposter syndrome, but when I first started working at Google, I was intimidated because here I am. I tried to go to school, but I never got a chance to go, not consistently. I got some college courses, but I got like a couple tech certifications, but I didn't feel like I was supposed to be there. So I had to go through that all over again because I don't have the degrees. I don't have, the family that backed my computer science degree. I didn't go to a historically Black college. Like, I don't have any of that in my toolbox, but I have other stuff. I have the people skills. I have the intelligence. I have the professional work ethic. So that's what got me into Google. And so with these people around me, they became just people. And so there was a point in time in my job where they were doing some type of an outreach for people that were previously incarcerated to get tech skills. And so during that time, I was able to share my story. So there are people now that I work with that have read the book, and I don't get the reaction that I probably would have thought that I would have got when I was a teenager. I just never saw that coming,
And why did you want to share your story today?
We live in a crazy world. I wanted to illuminate the fact that there is a God and that we are held accountable for a life outside of what's handed to us, that there are things in our life that we can't control, like as children and babies and things like that. We can't control those things, but there will come a time where we do have a choice to accept that as a negative and kind of just hang out in it and just, become worse because of it, or we can rise above it and pull other people up. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to let women know that even though people hurt you, as a child, even though, people have done things to you, heartbreak, abuse, bullying, all that kind of stuff. Suicide is a different thing now because it's a result of exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. And I remember going to a high school telling my story, and I went by myself, and my heart was in it. I wanted to do good. But when I left, I felt so heavy because I opened up wounds in that school where high school students were telling me, hey, look, I work at this place and my manager is making sexual advances to me. What should I do? Or I'm at home and my mom's boyfriend is touching me, but I don't think she's going to, like, it was so heavy. And I said I would never do that again without a team of people that could pick up the pieces that I've now opened, So I realized that there's a need for people to know that, hey, look, I was abused sexually. I was bullied because I was dark and because I wore glasses, and I was called ugly. And people said that I was ugly and I was poor and all this other stuff, but that's just a season. And if you can figure out how to get out of that season, if you can figure out what's important to you. When I first had my daughter, she was my very first child. I had her a year after I got out. She became my reason. She became my entire world of alternates. Like, okay, I don't want food stamps anymore because that means that I can't work a job that pays really well. She became the reason why my life shifted, because now I was responsible for this baby. And she doesn't realize how important of a role she played in my life. But if women could see that with their kids, there would be times that I would explain to my kids, like, if you have company, you need to keep the door open because things happen behind closed doors. Or I taught them, if anybody touches you here, they're not supposed to, you need to tell me. If we can just start having those conversations as parents, and this is just a call out to women and parents in general, we need to start having these discussions. And like, I get to be at the center of that because I get to say, this is what happened to me. And as a result of that, these are the residual effects of it. And then look what happened. Look what I did because of it. Like, you don't want that to happen to you. And so I get to say those type of things without shame or without fear of judgment or, without feeling like I'm not good enough, because I am. And because I'm here now, and it took a lot of work and it took a lot of love from other people. So I just want to be the example, and I don't want people to just hear it. I want them to see it in my life. So when I say I was sexually molested, I was bullied, I committed murder, my victim was my mom, I was in an institution from 12 to 21, I was in a dark place. I tried to kill myself. When I was in an institution, I cut on my arm. But here I am today. I'm 44, I have a great job. I'm about to be married to an amazing person. I have a group of wonderful friends, and I have advocates and people that know me from that time until now that can say the same thing. That's important.
Absolutely, yeah. And is there anything that I missed about your story or anything else that you want to share? Any more messages or anything like that?
Well, so there's like this, so, when I was growing up, we didn't have technology, we didn't have Google, we didn't have social media, So the message that I want to give is that it happened to, bullying and taunting and things like that happened to me physically, in my face, but it's no different now. There's just different avenues. There's just different tools, right? So I would say that, number one, we need to stop having family secrets. We need to talk about, the uncle that's molesting people in the family. We need to talk about, the mom's boyfriend that is sexually molesting the daughter. We need to have these discussions about kids being bullied on social media and then taking their life because they don't see that there's a way out. We need to have these discussions about these young girls being in abusive relationships, but because they feel like someone loved them, they feel like that's all they have. Like, we need to talk about these things more, because if we don't, then we'll create more victims. Because people who have been abused become abusers for the most part. Even I did, I was a bully at one point because I was being bullied, and it's like this cycle will continue until we make a decision to stop it. So I guess, that would be it. Like, we have to take personal accountability for our lives, and just because we're victims don't mean that we can't be victors.
Thank you so much for sharing. You did a really amazing job.